Hey guys, it's Nathan. This is episode 53 of The Nathan Seaward Show.
The Nathan Seaward Show, inspiring you to live an extraordinary life.
This episode is brought to you by my friends at Unsettled. Unsettled is a 30-day co-working retreat experience for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, and folks going through intentional transitions. They lead retreats in some of the most inspiring destinations in the world: Cape Town, Barcelona, Bali, just to name a few. I did Medellin in Colombia with them last year, and it was everything I could have imagined. Beautiful apartment, great co-working space, incredible community, and you get to be a part of their global community that they've created, and lots of incredible local connections and experiences. Go to beunsettled.co/Nathan, and they're going to give you $100 off, so do yourself a favor. beunsettled.co/Nathan, and prepare for one of the best months of your life. Well, welcome to the show, guys. Back after a couple of weeks hiatus and coming to you from beautiful Costa Rica, on the west coast of Costa Rica in the Guanacaste province. And I decided to record this outside because it's such a beautiful evening. And so you're going to hear some birds. You may hear the ocean in the background. We're just a little bit back from the ocean. And lots of other sounds. Who knows what might come up. I hope you've had a great couple of weeks. I've left New Zealand now, obviously, and travelled to Argentina and spent just over a week in Buenos Aires, which was incredible. Fell in love with that city. So much beautiful history, buildings, culture, people, and definitely one I'm going to have to go back and spend a bit more time on. And then the last 3 weeks I've been in Costa Rica, just getting settled in, getting used to being out of New Zealand and into this new life, the travel life, which is so far so good. I had a pretty intense experience with ayahuasca last week. Did 2 ayahuasca ceremonies, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a plant medicine from the Amazon, and been used by tribes there for a long time to cure physical ailments and also emotional and mental ailments as well. So yeah, did 2 ceremonies. It's very intense. It's kind of psychedelic. It makes you purge a lot, which is a nice way to say vomit and have stuff coming out of every orifice. But it was a very intense experience. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/Nathan.Seaward. And I did 2 Facebook Lives straight afterwards, just talking about the experience, answering people's questions. And it was very insightful. And, you know, the last couple of weeks have been a big transition. And, you know, it was a good chance to do a little bit of deep work to kind of kick off this new phase of the year. So the theme I want to explore with you guys over the next couple of weeks is around love and connection. So, you know, my life is dedicated to helping you have an extraordinary life. And one of the key pillars of an extraordinary life is having a sense of love and a deeper sense of connection with the people that are most important to you. So I want to explore all those topics over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing some Facebook Lives around this as well. All the guests on for the next few weeks are going to be all experts on the area of sex, love, relationship, connection. And we're just going to dive into it. So I'd love to hear from you. You know, what are your thoughts on sex, love, connection, relationship, marriage? Is marriage still relevant? Is monogamy still relevant? What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop me a message or comment on any of the posts on Facebook. You know, we're going to really explore things like self-love and self-compassion, and what does that mean? What does that mean to me? And, you know, what's really important? Just try and cut through some of the bullshit and figure out what are the things that are really important about love, finding true love, finding your soulmate, and deepening the relationships that we already have with our family. I know for a lot of people that I talk to, their relationship with their parents and their family is either struggling or strained. And in a dream world, they'd love to have a deeper connection with their parents or their brothers and their sisters, but for some reason, it just doesn't seem possible. So we're going to explore that as well. My guest this week is the wonderful Monica Day. I met Monica in London last year, and she is the author of the book Play Wild, Stay Safe. And she's a wild child herself. And, you know, when I met her, I love talking to Monica. She, you know, has so much knowledge about sex and relationships and masculine and feminine energy. And she's also a little bit intimidating. She's a little bit wild. She's a little bit unpredictable. And I love that, and it scares me a little bit. So I was excited to get Monica on the show and just dive in to learn a little bit more about her and her expertise around sex, love, and relationships. We touch on a bunch of topics in this one. I think you're going to enjoy it. So enjoy this very personal conversation with the powerful Monica Day. What do we need to know about Monica? Like if we go back in time, what are the turning points that kind of shape your story?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just start by saying that I live on the East Coast of the United States. That seems relevant. And the way I've often described it is that I'm an Italian Catholic Jew from Trenton, New Jersey, and that comes with a head roll. So if you're from here, what you kind of know about that is, that it comes with a little bit of kind of a directness, a forthrightness, and, attitude that's kind of distinct to where I come from.
Yeah, nice. So you grew up on the East Coast?
I did, yeah. I lived on the West Coast for about 8 years, 10. And then I came back here when I was pregnant with my first child. So I have 2 daughters. Mm-hmm. They're 19 and 16.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what does it look like? So growing up on the East Coast, can you give us more of a flavor of what that was like?
I can. And in some ways, I feel like what I grew up in doesn't kind of exist anymore. Mm. My experience was one of kind of relatively early immigrant-ish, like second generation. And on the East Coast, we're close to Ellis Island, right? Like that's where people came in. So that immigrant experience was pretty alive for me. So I think that's part of it. And where I come from in particular, New Jersey, Philadelphia, my team just won football. We're sort of obsessed in this country.
That's huge. Yeah.
With, football. And my team had never won, and we're, the underdogs. And, there was a joke made during the parade. One of the players, was just on national live TV, just throwing out F-bombs, and everybody in Philadelphia is just cheering, and that's, we're scrappy, we're a little scrappy, and we're not super polished. And what was interesting about that is that I've always kind of hated that a little bit of where I came from. Like I did a lot to not have the accent of where I live, and to, be able to come off a little bit classier than where I come from. And there was something about that moment, when I watched that on TV and I identified, I was like, God, those are my people, like better or worse, like it or not. Those are my people. That's where I come from. So it was an interesting moment of acceptance.
Yeah, it's a cool moment. Yeah, I really relate to that. Like same thing with New Zealand. There's certain things about New Zealand that just like make me cringe. And sometimes when I'm overseas, I'll see some Kiwis doing something and I'm like, oh. But there is something about connecting to that, whatever it is, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
And when you can accept that, you can learn to sort of accept yourself, because that is you. That is your heritage.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's been a journey for sure. And of course, now even more so, I sort of have a lot of feelings about just being American right now. That's also a big thing. And so I do feel like you have to embrace it before you can address it and fix it and, speak solidly from a place, so if what's happening right now, which I think might be true, is there's a need to reclaim the soul of where I come from. I can't do that unless I have my own, right?
Yeah, well, tell me more about that, because it's fascinating for us as outsiders. There's a lot of Americans listen to this. There's also a lot of Kiwis listen to this.
Right.
So it's interesting for us as an outsider, watch what's going on in America and just try to understand it from afar, not being in it. And you would have seen the full spectrum through your lifetime of, how we've got to this point, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I want to spare you some of the, kind of political details, if you will,
Sure.
the grit of it all. But I think some of us are trying to understand it as well. So, it's interesting when you say, oh, we're looking from afar, trying to understand it. Well, we're in it, trying to understand it, right? It definitely feels unprecedented in some ways. And if I were to take a big step back, I would say, and you and I have had this conversation, right? I would say that there are so many ways that we have not come to terms with who we are, who we have been as a country. There's been a myth that's been created, but that myth has been built on top of, a lot of pain, a lot of lies, a lot of, a lot of oppression, a lot of hurting of people. And if I was to take a really long view of it, I would say in some ways, the sins of our forefathers are coming to roost. And that maybe this falling apart that many of us are feeling is maybe a precursor to maybe resolving some of the things that weren't resolved that led to this moment.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. It feels painful.
It feels painful. It feels frightening. I mean, I won't say I don't know about good or bad, and I talk a lot about that in everything I do. We're so on good, bad, black, white, left, right, that I think it obscures kind of what might really be happening.
Yeah, well, you see a lot of passion come out at the moment from all angles, right? And I think that comes from being a right and a wrong or a good and bad. That's where that passion is fueled from, rather than just stepping back and going, wow, this is interesting what's playing out. What's my part in this? What can I do in this?
It's interesting because, you asked me in the beginning about what do I do? And I say, well, I instigate aliveness. And I think that one of the very noticeable things is that so many people have been sort of on autopilot, asleep, kind of numb for a really long time. And there is kind of a call to, you got to wake up. We can't autopilot our way through this. So, I don't know what it's all going to look like. I've got my plan A, plan B. I'm happy to have friends all around the world. So we'll see.
What do you see your part is? What's your part to play at the moment?
Yeah, it's great. I talk about it with my daughters a lot. Like, we have talked about this a lot. I came very close to leaving this country, actually, many times. I've been pulled by Canada, many times. When I was in Canada, when we had Hurricane Katrina, and I saw the coverage rather than from within the country, you might have this too. It's like how things are covered when you're in your country can be different than when you're outside of it, right? That's an interesting way to learn about stuff. And I remember being really horrified and thinking to myself, do we even want to go back? Or should we just make the leap? But in this go round, my daughters and I talked, and, my family heritage is part Jewish as well. And so there's definitely, a lot of feeling with the way immigration is being handled and things like that. Like, wow, how safe is it here and who is it safe for? And, one of the things my daughters and I talked about is that we might feel an obligation to stay, in that there are things about the way we look, who we are. I mean, what if we could be instrumental in helping people that are more in the crosshairs, of this administration, people of color, immigrants, that type of thing, is so, yeah, we're very much on but then we're also looking at where is the point where you got to cut and run to kind of save yourself, right? Where is the fact that, my girls, that I have young girls and that it's really inhospitable for women in some really basic ways here right now and moving in that direction. So that's an ongoing conversation.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you for talking about it, because it's, this is a snapshot in time. This podcast will be available for years, but this is just, I like having a snapshot of what's going on right now because it's real.
Yeah.
And it affects the whole world. How does it feel? Because when I go to America, there's a difference between, like what you said, what I read on the news and my experience day to day, which is completely different. I don't experience a lot of the things, like a lot of the headlines I don't experience, which is, it's one person's tiny snapshot. But do you experience a lot of the stuff that you read about?
Well, see, I think that's what's really fascinating. And the role of social media is certainly new. I mean, not something, that's part of the unprecedented nature, of it. If you look at social media, there's a way in which it all looks really contentious, or you look at just the way that things are covered and you extrapolate and think, oh, it's all like that. And yet, you walk around and it's like, we're getting along, we're having conversations, we're okay. There's a certain point where, and yet that's not true for everyone, right? I mean, I'm worried about what are the things that are being kept from my view.
Yeah.
I'm worried about what do the detention centers look like right now for immigrants. And of course, that's not something that's being shown to me. That's not something I'm seeing, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what's going on that I'm not seeing? So
that's a great question to ask. What is being kept from me?
Yes.
What am I not seeing?
What am I not seeing? Right. Sure. And,
It's a hard question to ask. Like, it's easier to not ask that question?
It's much easier to not ask, and it's sometimes hard to find the answer. And a lot of people aren't willing to or don't want to see. You know, I'm a white woman. There's a lot that if I don't want to see, I don't have to see, just because of the nature of race in this country. But I have to know that, and I have to be vigilant and curious and, you know, ask the question and all of that. That's incumbent on me.
Great insight. So I'm going to shift slightly again.
Yeah.
So this month's theme is all about love, connection,
Yeah.
sex. You know, you're the first person I thought of when I thought, who do I want to talk to about this? And,
that's so exciting.
Yeah. So how did you get more into that world of exploring deeper, you know, love, connection, sex?
Yeah. It's so interesting, right? I'm going to give you a little bit of a timeline because we were just talking about race, right?
Mm.
And I spent about 25, 30 years working more in what I would call kind of the social justice, social awareness realm, talking about things like race. And if sex was talked about, it was talked more about like gender or sexual orientation, kind of equality issues, right? And I thought at the time that those were like, I was in the heat of it, right? I like being in the heat of conversations. I like being in kind of the narrows, right? Where things get a little tight and how do we make it through, right? Challenging conversations. And then I kind of had my own awakening. I was coming up on 40, had a marriage that was going south. My kids were getting a little older. It was sort of a specific time in my life where I started to wake up to some of these things on a really personal level, you know, love, connection, sex, all of these things. And of course, because I am who I am, I start talking about them. I start talking about them with other people. And all of a sudden I realized...
Deeper than most, probably.
Yeah. Because I like that, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, this is some really heated stuff in here. Like, wow, people really don't talk about this. You know, I was dropped into this much deeper level and I was surprised by that. So that was sort of
really driven from a personal experience.
Totally driven from a personal experience. I mean, so were the earlier issues too, you know, all of it was. And I think if most of us are honest, we end up doing the things and interested in the things in our life from, you know, a personal endeavor, you know, in some way.
So what did you learn from your divorce in that time?
So much. It's funny, in the book that I just had come out, in the forward, the preface, I say that I wrote the book that I could have used, you know, like,
I love that.
You know, I couldn't have written that book 10, 12 years ago when things were coming apart. And I think, so it really taught me in many ways. Here's the funny thing, and I think we all do this. We get handed certain patterns, things we get taught, ways of behaving, whatever it is, right? And we do one of two things. We either follow it, right? Well, it worked for them, it'll work for me, right? Or we rebel. Oh, I'm not going to do that. And so, of course, we're just always bouncing back and forth, right? From thing to thing. And so, you know, my mother was married 3 times. My biological father was married 3 times. You know, just not a great track record in my family. And this was something I was really terrified about. But what was also true was, like, I didn't really know how good relationships went. Like, that wasn't part of my upbringing. I didn't get that download, you know.
So did you experience your marriage as one of connection, one of a connected?
I mean, it was. We were married for 10 years. We have 2 children. I would not label it a failure. I think it's sad when people, if you didn't end up doing the death do you part, then it's labeled as a failure. And I don't think that's really fair. But what I do know is that there were certain relationship patterns that I wasn't even aware of. And once I became aware of them, I certainly didn't know how to fix them because it was kind of all I knew. So, you know, I didn't actually mean for my marriage to end. I asked for a separation. But, you know, my now ex heard divorce. You know, he wasn't down for doing kind of the work that needed to be done, and you can't force someone, to do that kind of thing. So I think in many ways it was the fact that he didn't want to do that work, and I didn't want to just like carry on in the next relationship the way I had done, the last. I knew things needed to be healed. So
which that can be a tendency, kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, certainly energetically. I mean, how many of us do that? We look back and we say, geez, I've had the same relationship 5 times. It's just been with different people.
Yeah.
Right. And you learn a little bit and then you go on to the next one and you say, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to fix that. But, really.
You said it too, like this flip-flopping of going, well, I had that in my last relationship, so I definitely don't want that. And then so you just end up going from back and forth between the extremes.
Exactly. That's the flip-flop, right? So I knew that I wanted to heal those patterns, like really heal them and really understand them. And I knew that they were much, much deeper. The sexuality piece wasn't about that man and that marriage. That came from like my very conservative Catholic father telling me my genitals were dirty, like, come on, man.
It's that.
That leaves a mark, So there was, and, I lost my virginity non-consensually when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
That there were pieces of that, weren't healed. I mean, so I ended up on a really big journey. And I think the compelling thing for me was that I really quickly realized, and I think a lot of us do this, we get like, we think it's just us, right? Oh, it's just me. Nobody else does this. Nobody else is messed up in the ways I'm messed up, right? But because I'm someone who talks to people and I like having conversations, and I'm always, if I learn something, then I'm turning around and teaching it to the next person. I'm like one of those, hey, did y'all know about this? Right.
Big revelation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just who I am. And so what I quickly realized was that it was not me, and that it was something much bigger than just me, kind of more universal than just my little life, my little trajectory. So that became even more compelling. What was this thing that I tapped into? So that's been a driver.
Yeah, that's a big driver. And so what did you learn? So what journey did you go on after that? And what did you learn?
Well, the sex piece was big. The sex piece was really big.
That's good. Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about sex?
Yeah.
This is a really big one, which is that as a woman, I had to take ownership of my sex. So what does that mean? Right.
Mm.
So I have some phrases that I really don't like. And one of them is, he either can or can't make me have an orgasm. Right. And that's just one of many examples, right? We're always looking to our partner, and it could be anything from make me orgasm to make me happy, the whole make me thing. Mm-hmm. And so there was definitely a place where I had to really own my desire, my turn on, what did I want, and be able to start to say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. Having a voice is a really big one. And I'll say for a lot of women, and you might also say for men, right? Being able to, there's a lot for a lot of us, for me especially, there was a lot of shame that I had to confront and that I had to cast off. So it was a lot of undoing little things that were implanted along the way. So that was a big one.
That's a big one, yeah. What are some of the examples? Like that was a great one, about he can't make me orgasm, but how does it look to take responsibility? And is it right to say that you need to primarily take care of your own desires sexually?
Well, I think, if you say that, people are going to think that we're telling them that they just have to masturbate. Right. And
well, I mean more like even, when you're having sex with somebody else, that is your job to take care of your own desires, or is it to give yourself to the other person?
Well, here's the scariest thing. The scariest thing is sharing your desires, right? So there's the one end of things.
Why is it scary?
Because it means telling the truth. That's one of the scariest things. I often say that when people get into relationship, whether they get married or just when they get kind of in, right? I talk about the silent vow that they take, not the one at the altar, the one that they don't say, but they live, which is, I promise to never want more than I think you're willing to give me, right?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. I promise to never want more than I think you're willing to give me.
Yeah.
So this is a way that in relationship, we do it with the best of intentions. I don't want to admit that someone else turns me on or that I might want something a different way. I don't want to make you feel bad, and there's a lot of dynamics between men and women. If I make you feel bad, then, you might not get an erection. So I'm sort of caring for your erection, right? I care for your erection by caring for your ego. Right. We think that's so. Now this is, people can argue with these. I'm just giving sweeping generalizations at the moment. Or if I say I want something, I might stress you out because you think you have to provide this for me. Right. So little by little, people start to make their wants and desires smaller, or at least admit to less of them to their partner.
And that's when it starts to become routine.
Yeah.
I know what I've got to do. You know what you've got to do.
That's a big one. Yeah, we lose. So what I learned, you said, oh, what did you learn? Curiosity is a really big one. Being playful. Look at all the language that we use around sexuality. And again, we have some differences. I don't know if this language
No, it's perfect.
translates, but that whether you can perform or not, right? If a man has an erection, he can perform. If he doesn't, he can't, right? That you can
because it is a performance.
Because it's a performance, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Or that you can achieve orgasm. Orgasm is an achievement, right? So it's not possible for us to not take that language, right? You and I know as people who work as coaches, right? What do we always say to clients? Language is powerful, right? So look at the language that we use about this part of our lives.
And probably the language that we use internally.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And, it's, there's this idea that for women, it was always such a double bind too. It's like, I want to be experienced enough to be quote unquote good in bed, but I don't want to seem too experienced because I don't want to seem like I get, right. I don't want to look like I know too much. And, so if I say there's this idea that men want sex more than women, and I know I'm sort of coming down on the man-woman thing at the moment, but that was my world. So this was a lot of what I was looking into. And so, I came to find that is not true. That is really not true. And I work a lot with, work with both men and women, but when I do women's retreats and it's just women, what it is that we were often taught to use sex as a form of currency, right? And also approval or disapproval. So something ends up getting caught up in there. A woman can't just have her desire. Her desire has to be attached to, did you take the trash out or not? Or are you making enough money? Or are you, right? All those things. So in being the gatekeepers of sex, which is often the role that is given to women, depending on, how they were raised, we have to have criteria in order to sex with someone.
Yeah.
And that criteria is not usually our desire.
Desire's down the list somewhere.
Yeah. And people are afraid, both men and women are afraid of desire. We're intrigued by it, right? But we're also afraid of it. I often say that was a big thing that I had to learn too, that desire is a fuel. And like any fuel, it's like, it does need to be respected. I mean, sometimes I think people think I'm like this sexual liberation. Any form of freedom comes with responsibility, and sexual freedom is no different.
So you would say start getting curious. If you want to, I'm talking about if you want to improve your sex life, or if you want to understand your sex life better, get curious. Get curious at the language you use. Get curious about when you have sex, the pressure that you put on yourself, where it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Start that inquiry.
Absolutely. Curiosity and playfulness. There is not enough play in the grown-up world. Like, we don't play enough.
In and out of the bedroom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny, this whole in and out of the bedroom thing. I often say that if you're keeping your orgasm in the bedroom, it's way too small. And what I mean by that is that our sexuality really is our life force energy. I mean, if you look at the body, if you look at it energetically, if you look at it, it's not something that lives in a little compartment. And so I think that's one of the ways that we try to manage it and control it and put it away. And, and I think we do that because we're afraid of the power of it in some ways.
I think it's the shame piece as well. There's a lot of us are very shameful about our desire.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So lock it up in a room.
Yeah.
And make sure no one hears you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely, I think shame is one. And also loss of control. That's a really big one. I always think it's so interesting that really what orgasm is a temporary loss of control. I mean, you can't really have an orgasm, right? Without that moment of surrender. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another really important piece that I learned. I talk a lot in my practice about forms of protection. What are all the ways that we protect ourselves, right? And I think that men have certain ways of protection and women have some, not saying there's no overlap, right? But controlling, complaining, managing, these are often all forms of protection that we use.
Yeah, that was an aha moment for me just then when you said that, because I realized that, I come across a lot of controlling behavior, subtle and not so subtle, in my work and just day to day, family maybe. And that's interesting that desire is one of those things we can't control. And maybe we can box it up as tightly as we can, but we can't control it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that becomes threatening.
It does. It's one of the reasons that people hold back. But here's the thing. See, this is what I get so fascinated by. Our bodies, if you look at us as like a system, right? Like that we're programmed in certain ways. I mean, we're programmed with, an orgasm response it's not like it's different for everybody. It's not like it's in my ear and it's in your, finger, right? It's like we all have an orgasm response in our genitals, and that's how that goes. So if you look at it as a form, I call it like a code, right? Like a source code. I often say that everything I needed to know I learned from my orgasm. So I learned how to surrender in that place, and then that taught me how to surrender in other parts of my life. So
vulnerability there.
Yeah, the vulnerability, the being open to someone, the letting myself be held, the all of that, all of the things that were super challenging to me because of how I was raised, because of, what my unique sort of imprint was of family and everything. I was able to change those patterns by studying my orgasm, my intimacy, my relationships. And then that expanded to other parts of my life. So that's really the core of what I teach. So that's why when people say, are you a sex coach, or are you a sex educator? No.
Sex is like a gateway to bigger things.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk about communication, because you touched on it in a couple of places. And my experience is when I try to talk about sex, I think I fuck it up. And I think I put a whole lot of pressure on it, and it has the opposite effect of what I think it should have.
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong?
That's an interesting. Can I ask you a clarifying question on that? When you try to talk about it, do you mean in a high sensation moment, like when you're actually in the moment trying to talk about it, or just any time? Do you talk about it casually?
That's far too embarrassing to talk about it in the moment. But I try to be a good boyfriend, and I try to, have conversations about sex, and is this working for you? Would you like more? Would you like less? This is what I would like. And and it sometimes gets a bit weird.
Perfect.
A bit awkward.
That's a great clarification. So if you look at some of the language that you just used, you're looking for, is it good, bad? Is it right, wrong? Right? It's all sort of performance oriented. So I talk about the language of sensation versus the language of judgment. So I'm going to give you an example of what I mean. Most of the ways that we talk is language of judgment. We have very little language for sensation. So let's say if I'm going to tickle you up your arm, you might say, that feels good, or you might say, that feels bad, which tells me nothing about how it actually feels and what I'm doing, right? But if you were to say to me, when the tips of your fingers lightly brush against my skin, I feel this tingling sensation that shoots all the way up my arm. Whew. Do you feel the difference?
Yeah, now we've got something.
Now I've got something, right? And then I might say to you, and I call this the approval sandwich, right? Because the other thing we often do is we complain. Complain it's a really big one.
It's a good way to shut everything down.
Yeah, absolutely. So I might say, oh, I'm really enjoying the tickling sensation of your fingertips along my arm. I would love a little bit more pressure, maybe with your nails into my skin. And then the person makes the adjustment, and then thank you so much. And then you give them another snapshot of how that feels, right? And I don't know if you can tell as I do it, but not only is there more sensation, but the intimacy goes through the roof. Because now the other person can feel what you're feeling. So now we're not just talking about sex, which is removed. We're actually sharing a sensation with one another.
Yeah, we're connecting.
Exactly.
Yeah, oh, I love that. It's great.
Game changer.
And it's sensation, not judgment.
Right. Right. And I run people through exercises with this and with one another if I'm working with a couple, and the other person will have to raise their hand when they pick up on judgment language, because we use it and don't even notice it, right? All the time.
Yeah, that was a great insight. I wouldn't have picked that at all. And let's talk about, I'm not getting enough sex. I want more sex.
Let's talk about that, Nathan.
Because I think that's
my reality right now.
Yeah, well, that's the one I hear the most of, whether you're in a relationship or not, is I'm not having sex.
Right. Not having sex, or I'm not having enough. So there's a few things about that. One is, I love this question of enough, right? Like, what is enough? And we use that a lot. And right, what's enough money? What's enough free time? What's enough? So part of that,
it's not exactly abundance, is it? It's just like, I just want to get enough.
Right. Well, it's not only is it not of abundance, but it's like, what's the criteria? Because sometimes people will, one person might be saying, well, I don't know, we're only having sex 3 times a week, right? And somebody says, geez, we have sex 3 times a week. How much more do you want? Right? Yeah. So enough is going to be different for every person. And then there's also sort of the quantity versus the quality aspect, right? How deeply nourishing is your sex? Is it goal oriented, right? Meaning like we go for the orgasm and that's it. Which is sometimes not, it can be a stress reliever maybe, or it can be a release, but it might not be really nourishing. So, are you having McDonald's sex, or are you having like 5-star Michelin sex? Right.
Yeah, because once a week of the latter could be nourishing enough.
Absolutely. And I think there is something to be said for the solo relationship. And I joke a lot. I'm at a point in my life. I mean, I would very much like sex with a being. That would be awesome.
Ideally.
That would be great. And, here's what's gotten really interesting for me. My time with myself is really satisfying. Like, it's really nourishing. And I think that sometimes our solo time we use as almost just like a little escape valve, and people, they use porn and they just kind of get off and that kind of thing. And that is also not very satisfying. So there is a way, often even if partners are not on the same page, and it's challenging for two people to want the same thing at the same time, right? That's not always going to happen in even the best relationships. So can we not put it all on our partner to satisfy us, and have our solo time be sensual as well as sexual, for example? Can you really, so, my bar now for a partner, I've been told is a high bar, but it has to be at least as good as the time I have with myself. And the time I have with myself is really good.
Pretty good.
Right? So I think there's a lot of ways to bring oneself to that question of enough. What do you do if you're not feeling enough?
Yeah, quality, quantity. What's my part in it? How much am I taking care of myself?
Yeah. And sometimes partners too, it's like, is there a way where you can be with each other? It's like, it doesn't have to be. And I love, I'm talking to you, right, as a gay man, like in heterosexual culture, we get really hung up on, we don't call it sex until it gets to penetration, right? And that's, when you come out of kind of heterosexual world, people look at us like there's a lot more going on than that, right? So how are you with one another? Does everybody have to get off for you to call it sex? Are you willing to just witness your partner? Are you willing to be there with them in some kind of a way? Are you willing to sometimes just be there for what the other person needs without it crossing a boundary of yours?
Well, can you give everybody permission to not have an orgasm every time?
Oh, yes. I am the permission fairy. That's so important. And there is an interesting thing as far as men and women are concerned in terms of just their biological. We have this idea that everybody's body works the same way, right? And that you have this leading up to a climax, and then you have, climax, and then you have but our bodies actually...
The sleeping portion.
Yeah, right. But our bodies, first of all, work differently than one another biologically, and also our bodies work differently over time. So there is some belief that, like Taoists, for example, that men as they age should actually ejaculate less and orgasm less. And then women should be orgasming more. Sorry, but that's how that goes. For a couple of reasons. One is that for men, you actually can separate your orgasm from your ejaculation. Takes some doing. But that's actually healthier for you as you age because you do, have the ejaculate. That's a losing of sort of life force energy. Like men often get tired. There's that sleeping thing, and women often get more energized. That's because of the difference in the impact of orgasm on our systems. Now, the thing about that is that people can start to plug into one another's systems. So you can sort of not be having an orgasm and be sexual without climaxing. And that can go on for days. I mean, I have some clients that are, they play a little bit every day in some kind of sensual or sexual realm. But he might only have an actual, ejaculation once every couple of weeks, and he's in his early 70s and his wife is in her 60s. Right. So I think we have to really expand this idea of what sex is or what it means. It's really broad.
Yeah, it really is. And it becomes so narrow.
Yeah, we make it really narrow. Yeah, we make it.
Let's talk about monogamy and polyamory.
Sure.
Where do you personally, where have you come down on this with all talking to a lot of different people and doing your own work? Is there a place for it? I mean, it's certainly, I would suggest, more common in my community to have open relationships.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know that I come down anywhere, to be honest. I've run the gamut myself. My marriage was monogamous. I didn't know there was anything else at that time, really.
I think
Anything
it's true
else?
for a lot of people.
Yeah, anything else I called cheating. I didn't really know. And then after, part of the exploration was I then came in contact with other ways of relating, open relating, polyamorous relating. So for me, again, this comes down to, I find different things work at different times for different people, right? For those years, I learned so much from open relating. Like I learned a lot from experiencing jealousy. We often try to avoid jealousy. Like that's the worst, of all the feelings we don't want to feel.
Yeah.
Jealousy is the one that will organize our lives around not having to feel that. And
so
yet,
true.
What I discovered is that jealousy is actually a window into desire, a really important window into desire. The whole I'll have what she's having, right? So I found that open relating helped me tremendously with some of those relationship patterns that I was trying to address. Now I'm coming to a place where I'm coming back around to being interested in monogamy, but from a very different place, not because it was just handed to me as like the thing, but I'm getting this sense that there's a depth in there, right? So I'm going, and I'm saying all this because I think we don't talk about life cycles as it relates to our sex and relating very much at all. Like that's just not a conversation, and it's such an important one. So there's this myth that as women get older, and we go through menopause, that we lose our desire. What I'm finding for myself, and this will come back to your question in a second, is that there was a time in my life where it was kind of like the California wildfires that we just saw, right? It was light a match, any match, and it's off the charts. And my feeling now is that it's more like that molten core of the earth, like it's that kind of heat. Both very hot, but very different. Right? So to me, that is what's informing some of my desires around what do I want my relationship structure to look like.
Well, is it nice to still now have the option? Does that give you a certain sense of, I don't know what the word is, just reassurance that you know how to do open, you know how to do polyamory. It's there if I need it. If that's something I desire, I know how to do that. But for now, monogamy feels right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I discourage people from labels. We're so into our identities and our labels, and I understand them to a certain point, right? And I mean, you might want to weigh in on this, right? It was probably important for you at a point in your life to be out as a gay man. Like so I'm not taking that away, right? But what I'm saying is that sometimes we allow our identities and labels to become as much of a prison as it is to not be able to claim them, right? So,
that's the challenge.
Yeah. So can we just say like, oh, let the relationship tell me what it wants, or let this time in my life tell me what's the right relationship?
Yeah, let it guide it.
Yeah.
How does sex relate to? I feel like I've got you under examination. Yeah, I just love talking about this, and it's cool to have you. You're so open about it, and it's so easy. But one thing I'm intrigued about is how sex actually plays into, say, spirituality in my life, and just I guess that sort of Anglo-Christian upbringing. They're very separate. You have your spirituality, and sex is a dirty thing that you do occasionally behind closed doors, and maybe if you want to reproduce. The more I go through life, the more I feel that how intertwined my spirituality and my sexual connection is.
Yeah. That was, in many ways, when I went down the rabbit hole of this exploration, that's the place that I got to that was probably the most surprising. Was the connection between God or source or whatever and sex, that they're not separate at all. But I came to realize, for myself personally at least, that sex is actually the gateway to a richer, deeper sense of spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very betrayed by that, meaning betrayed by sort of the religious upbringing that kept trying to pull those things apart.
Yeah, they could get it so wrong.
Yeah, and there's a whole sort of diatribe that I could
Totally,
go on
yeah.
about that, of course, which I'll spare you and your listeners at the moment, unless at some point that makes sense. But I feel as though it robs us of a really important connection to spirit and to one another. That I think, I've often joked and said that it comes up at the most unlikely times, right? It's like sometimes people, they want to set out to have spiritual sex, and so they're going to do eye gazing and tantric things and, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, sometimes I've just stumbled backwards onto the most spiritual moments, I mean, call me a dirty little whore and all of a sudden I'm seeing God. I mean, I can't explain that.
That's going to be the title of this episode.
Yeah. I mean, I ended up doing a one-woman show about this very topic, and I called the show The Song of the Sacred Whore, because I grew up with my very Catholic father calling my mother a whore. Wow. And telling me that I was at risk, for being like my mother in that way. And I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew it wasn't good. And, so.
We've come such a long way in one generation.
Yeah. Well, we haven't, here, at least in this country, we've got this whole wave of evangelical Christianity that's actually still has all that same, belief to it. It's unfortunate, but it's, it's still very confronting for some people to say that there is something, spiritual about our sex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very cool. Thank you for touching on that. Your book, Play Wild, Stay Safe.
Yeah.
We've touched on it a few times. And who's it for?
Yeah.
You should read it.
I really wrote it to be a mainstream book. So it has beautiful photos in it, but they're all very tasteful. Mm-hmm. And it really introduces a lot of these topics that we're touching on, communication, being curious, being playful. It's written in really simple, direct language. So I wanted it to be super accessible, but I also wanted it to introduce some new and edgy topics, So, we talk about things like safe words and things that might be considered a little bit more experimental, playing with, sensation deprivation, putting on blindfolds, some of these things that might be considered outside of the box for some people. And, so it's all in there.
I love it. Was there anything in there that you thought, I'm not sure how this is going to land with people. I'm a little bit nervous about putting this out there.
It's interesting. Well, I did put a poem of my own in there, just one, because I am a poet. That's and I didn't put but I had to put one in there, and that one's a little bit racy. But it's funny. There's exercises in the back. There's like 12 exercises that couples can do. The one that's been the most confronting to people is the very last one, and it's called Be a Sacred Witness. And the exercise is allowing your partner to watch you, but not as like in a very sacred way, to watch you be with yourself basically, and without touching and without, really just witnessing. And that's been the one that people have found the most confronting when they've gone through the book.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the intimacy. We think it's about the sex, and it's not. It's about the intimacy.
Well, I think people don't realize how much of a lack of intimacy there is. So it's hard to understand something that you don't know, you don't have.
Yeah. I talk a lot about high sensation moments, and that's a lot of what the book addresses is, because when we get into what is a high sensation moment, that's when we get all tongue tied and we don't know what we're doing. And, we can't speak in full sentences and check out, right? And all this kind of stuff. And so part of it is expanding our capacity to stay present and connected with each other in those high sensation moments. And things get really good when you can start to do that with one another. But it also
uncomfortable to start with.
Yeah.
And then good.
Yeah.
And then really
exactly.
good.
Yeah. And then you just can't do it any other way.
Amazing. And we'll put a link to the book. So, I want as many people to get it as possible.
Yeah.
And how do people work with you, and how do you work with people, and where do people find you?
Yeah. So you can find me at my website, monicaday.com. And I work with people a lot of different ways. I have workshops and retreats that I give. So that's a good way for people to get a dose of me. But I also have private clients, both individuals and couples, and I work with them one-on-one like this. I do a lot of this because my clients are all over the world. And then sometimes I do private intensives. So just one-on-one, come hang out with me somewhere for a weekend and we dive in really deep. So I have a whole range.
Yeah, so exciting. I hope lots of people take you up on that, because it's such powerful work. Powerful work.
Too.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Yeah, it's awesome. The last question I ask everybody, the question is around the dark side. What is your dark side? Maybe even how do you relate to a dark side? And how do you embrace the darker side of yourself?
Yeah. It's funny. I think there was a day I would have answered that by just telling you my kinkiest fantasy. But I've come to really think that that's not exactly dark. That's just sort of taboo. I think the darker side for me has been engaging with anger in a powerful way, and allowing. Here's the way I'll explain it to you. I was really angry once, and a lover of mine, person I was with at the time, looked at me and he said, "Wow, you're really turned on right now." And yeah. And I had to realize that my anger, my, Kali, if you know the goddess Kali, right? The destroyer, like I am a creator and I am also a destroyer. And I have to know when it's the right situation to let that destructive side be a healing and cleansing kind of destruction versus, right, not always wanting to, I want to create. It's like, no, sometimes you got to raise the damn field. And am I wise enough to know when to pull that energy out?
Yeah, I love that. So it's anger, destruction, is acknowledging that that's a part of you as much as creation.
Yeah. And not being afraid. I think the biggest thing is not being afraid of that and keeping that down and keeping it back, but recognizing sometimes that's as important as, creating.
When you said it, that partner said, you're really turned on right now. So is it a way for you to embrace it is in the bedroom?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Angry sex.
Oh, are you kidding? Hot hate sex? It's the best. I will say that's probably one of the reasons my marriage didn't make it, is that we didn't fight and we didn't have makeup sex.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Super.
There's no outlet for that dark side.
Yeah. Yeah. No, right. No healthy way to really be with each other through that.
Yeah. Well, you've made me blush more times than anybody else ever on the show, and I'm hoping this light that I have in my face is hiding.
It's funny because I was looking at you and I was like, oh, he looks so nice and warm. And I'm all drowned out.
I'm warm. Very warm.
I challenge you next time we're not on a screen. We're just sitting having coffee. I challenge you to have the same conversation with me.
Oh, I accept. I 100% accept.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Monica, thank you. This has been such a pleasure. I hope people get a lot out of this, because it's beautiful to have these conversations. And I hope it stimulates people to have these conversations in their own lives, friends, family, coaches, partners, hopefully.
Absolutely. I would love that too. And I just want to invite anybody who was intrigued, just be in touch with me. It doesn't mean we have to work together. We can have a conversation. Let's just see where it goes.
Absolutely.
I love this stuff.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Big love.
Thanks, Nathan. Great. Mwah.
There you have it, folks, my conversation with the wonderful Monica Day. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Check out Monica's book. It's available everywhere. Amazon, Book Depository. Play wild, stay safe. And you can check out Monica at her website, monicaday.com. Thanks for joining us. If you love the episode, share it around all over the internet, Facebook, show some love, and we can keep growing this little movement that we've created together. Thanks, guys. I'll be back next week for episode 54 of The Nathan Seaward Show.
That was The Nathan Seaward Show, inspiring you to live an extraordinary life.
This episode has been brought to you by my friends at Unsettled. Unsettled is a 30-day co-working retreat experience for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, and folks going through intentional transitions. They have incredible retreats all around the world: Portugal, Bali, Colombia, Nicaragua, just to name a few. I did Medellin in Colombia last year. It blew my mind. A great bunch of people there, lots of really cool local experiences, beautiful office to work from, a lovely apartment. They organise it all, guys. So go to beunsettled.co/Nathan and I'm going to get you $100 off your first trip. So do yourself a favour, check out beunsettled.co/Nathan and prepare for one of the best months of your life.